Folks, they say doctors play God. Well, let me tell you, if I'm God, then the afterlife is a whole lot of paperwork and terrible coffee. I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how I lost my faith in medicine and found something much more valuable. But before we dive into all that, let me paint you a picture of who I was before my life turned upside down. Picture this. A 42-year-old woman, hair always in a messy bun, because who has time for a blowout when you're saving lives, right? Designer bags under my eyes that would make Gucci jealous, and a caffeine addiction that would put a college student during finals week to shame. That was me, Sarah Mitchell, MD, the star of Metro General's ER. Now, I didn't always want to be a doctor. No, little Sarah wanted to be a ballerina. Can you imagine? Me in a tutu? But life has a funny way of redirecting your path. One broken ankle, 2 surgeries, and an inspiring orthopedic surgeon later, and boom, little Sarah traded her tutu for a stethoscope. Fast forward through years of med school, residency, and more sleepless nights than I care to remember, and there I was, the doctor everyone wanted, but nobody liked. You see, I had a reputation. Dr. Ice Queen, they called me behind my back. To my face, it was all, yes, Dr. Mitchell, and right away, Dr. Mitchell. I wore that nickname like a badge of honor. In my mind, emotions were a luxury that got in the way of doing the job. It was a Tuesday. I remember, because Tuesdays always sucked at Metro General. The weekend warriors had sobered up, the hypochondriacs had Google diagnosed themselves with some new exotic disease, and there I was, standing in the ER, wondering if I could diagnose myself with a case of acute career regret. The ER was its usual chaos. To my left, a guy with a remote control stuck in a place remotes should never go. To my right, a woman insisting her common cold was actually a rare tropical disease she read about online. Just another day in paradise, folks. I grabbed my chart and called out, "Mr. Johnson?" A middle-aged man limped over, his face a mask of pain. "What seems to be the problem?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "My back, doc. It's killing me. I think I need some strong painkillers." I raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Johnson, this is your 3rd visit this month for back pain. Have you been doing the exercises I recommended?" He shuffled his feet, avoiding my gaze. "Well, you see, doc." "Save it." I cut him off. "Let me guess, you've been lifting things you shouldn't again? What was it this time? Helping a friend move? Showing off at the gym?" He mumbled something about a jet ski and a dare. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Mr. Johnson, I'm not going to prescribe you painkillers. What you need is physical therapy, and to stop acting like you're still 20. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients with actual emergencies to attend to." Harsh? Maybe, but in my book, tough love was still love. Sort of. I moved on to my next patient, a teenage girl with a suspicious-looking rash. As I examined her, a commotion at the ER entrance caught my attention. "Dr. Mitchell, we need you in Trauma 1, a nurse called out. I sighed, took a swig of my coffee, which, by the way, tasted like it had been filtered through a hobo's sock, and made my way over. "What have we got?" I asked, snapping on my gloves. "Jane Doe, approximately 5 years old, found unconscious in Central Park. No ID, no guardian." I looked down at the little girl on the stretcher. Blonde hair, pale skin, lips tinged with blue. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something. A twinge in my chest, a tightness in my throat. Then I shoved it down, way down where I keep all those pesky emotions that get in the way of doing my job. "All right, people, let's move. I'd like to save this kid before my coffee break, if possible. I hear they're serving slightly less terrible coffee this afternoon." The team sprang into action, each of us falling into our well-rehearsed roles. I barked orders, my voice steady and sure, even as my mind raced through possible diagnoses. "Get me a CBC, chem panel, and tox screen. And someone call up to PEDS, let them know we're coming." As we worked to stabilize her, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling. Something about this kid was different. And let me tell you, in my line of work, different is never good. Hours passed in a blur of tests, consultations, and more coffee. The girl remained unconscious, her small body dwarfed by the hospital bed and all the machinery keeping her alive. I found myself returning to her room more often than necessary, telling myself it was just professional thoroughness. It was during one of these check-ins that I ran into Dr. Tom Harris, the chief of pediatrics. Tom was one of those eternally cheerful types that I usually avoided like the plague, but he was damn good at his job, so I tolerated him. "Sarah," he greeted me with his usual enthusiasm. "Any updates on our little Jane Doe?" I shook my head. "Stable, but still unconscious. All tests came back inconclusive. It's like her body just decided to shut down." Tom frowned, his perpetual smile faltering for a moment. "And still no word on the parents?" "Nothing. It's like she just materialized out of thin air in the middle of Central Park." We stood there in silence for a moment, watching the steady rise and fall of the girl's chest. It was Tom who finally broke the silence. "You know, Sarah, it's okay to feel something. Compassion doesn't make you a worse doctor." I snorted. "Save the psychoanalysis, Tom. I don't need to feel anything to do my job." He gave me a look that was far too knowing for my comfort. "Maybe not, but it might make you a better person." I rolled my eyes. "I'll leave the feelings to you, Dr. Sunshine. I prefer my emotions like I prefer my coffee, non-existent in this hospital." Tom chuckled, shaking his head. "One of these days, Sarah, something's going to crack that icy exterior of yours, and I hope I'm there to see it." Little did I know that day was coming sooner than I thought. As my shift dragged on, I found my thoughts continually drifting back to the little girl. Why wasn't she waking up? Where were her parents? What kind of monster abandons a child in Central Park? These questions nagged at me, distracting me from my other patients. It was nearing the end of my shift when all hell broke loose. The girl's monitor started blaring, the shrill sound cutting through the usual ER cacophony. I sprinted to her room, my heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. "What's happening?" I demanded as I burst through the door. "She's seizing," a nurse called out. For the next few minutes, the room was a flurry of activity. Orders were shouted, medications administered, and through it all, I found myself praying to a God I hadn't believed in for years. Finally, mercifully, the seizure stopped. The girl lay still once more, the only sound the steady beep of the heart monitor. I stood there, my scrubs damp with sweat, feeling more shaken than I had in years. As the room cleared out, I found myself alone with her. I looked down at her small, pale face and felt something inside me crack. "Come on, kid," I whispered, surprising myself. "You've got to wake up. There's a whole world out there waiting for you." I reached out, hesitating for a moment before gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. And that's when it happened. Her eyelids fluttered, and slowly, so slowly, they opened. Two big blue eyes stared up at me, filled with fear and confusion. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. For a moment, I couldn't speak. All my years of medical training, all my carefully cultivated detachment, and I was struck dumb by a pair of blue eyes. Finally, I found my voice. "You're in the hospital, kid. You gave us quite a scare. What's your name?" "Lily," she whispered. "Where's my mom?" And there it was. The million-dollar question. I'd delivered bad news countless times, told people their loved ones were gone. It was part of the job. So why did my throat suddenly feel tighter than my ex-wife's new facelift? "We're trying to find her, Lily," I said, my voice gentler than I could ever remember it being. "Can you tell me the last thing you remember?" She scrunched up her face, thinking hard. "We were in the park. Mom said she'd be right back. She told me to wait by the big rock. I waited and waited, but she didn't come back." I felt something then, something I hadn't felt in years. Rage. Pure, unadulterated rage. What kind of monster abandons a child in Central Park? "Well, Lily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you're safe now. We're going to take good care of you until we figure this out." As I left her room, I realized I was in trouble. Deep trouble. Because for the first time in years, I cared. And in my line of work, caring is a luxury I couldn't afford. Or so I thought. Little did I know, this Tuesday was about to get a whole lot worse. Or better. Depends on how you look at it, I suppose. But hey, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just say, by the end of this shift, I'd be questioning everything I thought I knew about medicine, life, and myself. So buckle up, folks. This is going to be one hell of a ride. Now, where was I? Oh, right, the mystery girl. Lily, the child who appeared out of nowhere and somehow managed to crack my carefully constructed emotional armor. Let me tell you, folks, that's not an easy feat. The last time I felt anything remotely close to an emotion, I think Obama was still in office. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let's rewind a bit. After Lily woke up, things got complicated. We managed to stabilize her, but that was just the beginning of our problems. See, in my experience, unconscious kids usually come with frantic parents not far behind. But hours went by, and nobody came looking for our Jane Doe. Sorry, Lily. I found myself coming back to her room again and again between patients. There was something about her, something that nagged at me like a hangnail on my conscience. Each time I walked in, those big blue eyes would light up, and damn if it didn't do something to my cold, shriveled heart. "Dr. Sarah," she'd call out, a smile brightening her pale face. "Did you find my mom yet?" And each time I'd have to shake my head, watching as the light in her eyes dimmed just a little bit more. "Not yet, kiddo," I'd say, trying to keep my voice upbeat. "But we're still looking. How about I tell you about some of the crazy things I've seen in the ER today?" She'd nod eagerly, and I'd launch into a story about Mr. Jenkins and his unfortunate encounter with a jar of peanut butter, don't ask, or Mrs. Rodriguez and her haunted dentures. Anything to see that smile again. But as the hours ticked by, the reality of the situation started to sink in. This wasn't just a case of a lost child. This was abandonment, plain and simple. I cornered Nurse Jenny, who had been helping with Lily's case. "Any updates on the parents?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Jenny shook her head, her eyes full of sympathy. "Nothing, Dr. Mitchell. Police are still looking, but..." She trailed off, leaving the unspoken words hanging in the air. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Keep me posted," I managed to say. I'd hate for all our hard work to go to waste when her parents sue us for malpractice. Jenny gave me a look. "You know the one. That I see right through your bullshit look that nurses have perfected over years of dealing with difficult doctors and even more difficult patients." "Dr. Mitchell," she said gently, "it's okay to care about her. Nobody would think less of you for it." I snorted, my defenses snapping back into place. "Care? Please. I'm just doing my job. Speaking of which, I should get back to it. Those hypochondriacs aren't going to diagnose themselves with obscure tropical diseases, you know." I turned on my heel and marched off, ignoring the knowing look Jenny was boring into my back. I had patients to see, charts to update, lives to save. I didn't have time for feelings. But as I made my rounds, I couldn't shake the image of Lily's face from my mind. The hope in her eyes when I walked in, the disappointment when I had no news about her mom. It was like a splinter in my brain, irritating and impossible to ignore. I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor, barking orders at interns and sending hypochondriacs home with prescriptions for common sense. But no matter how busy I kept myself, my feet always seemed to find their way back to Lily's room. It was during one of these visits that everything changed. I walked in, fully prepared to regale Lily with another tale from the ER trenches, when I noticed something was off. She was sitting up in bed, her small hands fidgeting with the blanket, her eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "Hey, kiddo," I said, forcing a cheerfulness I didn't feel. "How are you holding up?" She didn't respond, didn't even seem to notice I was there. A chill ran down my spine. "Lily?" I moved closer, waving a hand in front of her face. Nothing. "Lily, can you hear me?" And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. She blinked, her eyes focusing on me. "Dr. Sarah?" she said, her voice small and confused. "When did you come in?" I felt my doctor mode kick in, pushing aside the fear that had been building. "Just now, kiddo? Can you tell me what just happened? How are you feeling?" She scrunched up her face, thinking hard. I don't know. I felt funny for a minute, like I was floating. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral even as my mind raced through possible diagnoses. Okay, Lily, I'm gonna run a few tests, all right? Nothing to worry about, just want to make sure everything's shipshape. As I ordered the tests and waited for the results, I found myself pacing the hallway outside Lily's room. This was more than just a case of abandonment. There was something medically wrong with this child, and for the first time in years, I felt the icy fingers of fear grip my heart. Hours passed in a blur of tests, consultations, and more coffee than any human should consume in a single shift. I pored over Lily's charts, ran and reran the numbers, consulted with every specialist in the hospital, and still, nothing made sense. It was well past midnight when I finally stumbled into the on-call room, my eyes burning from exhaustion. I collapsed onto a bunk, not even bothering to kick off my shoes. But sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily's face, heard her voice asking about her mom. What kind of mother abandons her child in the park? The question had been gnawing at me all day. As a doctor, I'd seen my fair share of neglect and abuse. But this was something else entirely. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake by an agitated nurse. Dr. Mitchell! Dr. Mitchell, wake up! I bolted upright, nearly colliding with the nurse. What? What is it? It's Lily, the nurse said, her eyes wide with fear. She's having some kind of episode. I was on my feet and out the door before she could say another word, my heart pounding in my ears. As I raced towards Lily's room, I silently cursed myself. I should have stayed with her. I should have seen this coming. I burst into the room, and for a moment I froze. Lily was convulsing on the bed, her small body racked with violent spasms. The monitors were going crazy, alarms blaring from every direction. How long has she been seizing? I demanded, snapping into action. About 2 minutes, a nurse replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. I barked out orders, my hands moving on autopilot as I administered medication and monitored Lily's vitals. The next few minutes felt like hours as we fought to bring the seizure under control. Finally, mercifully, Lily's body stilled. The alarms quieted, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I stood there, my scrubs damp with sweat, feeling more shaken than I had in years. As the room cleared out, I found myself alone with her once again. I looked down at her small, pale face, so peaceful now, and felt something inside me break. What's happening to you, kiddo? I whispered, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. And then, like a scene from a movie, her eyes fluttered open. Dr. Sarah? She mumbled, her voice hoarse. Hey there, champ, I said, forcing a smile. You gave us quite a scare. She looked around, confusion clouding her features. What happened? I hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. You weren't feeling well for a bit, but you're okay now. How about you get some rest, and we'll talk more in the morning? She nodded, her eyelids already drooping. Will you stay with me? She asked, her small hand reaching for mine. I felt my throat tighten. Of course, kiddo. I'm not going anywhere. As Lily drifted off to sleep, her hands still clutching mine, I felt something shift inside me. The walls I'd built up over years of practicing medicine, the emotional distance I'd always maintained with my patients, it all came crumbling down in the face of this small, vulnerable child. I don't know how long I sat there, holding Lily's hand and watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. But as the first rays of dawn began to peek through the hospital windows, I made a decision. I was going to figure out what was wrong with Lily, and I was going to find her family. And God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. Little did I know, the journey I was about to embark on would change not just Lily's life, but mine as well. In ways I never could have imagined. So, strap in, folks, because this is where things really start to get interesting. Certainly, here's an expanded version of Chapter 3, The Diagnosis That Changed Everything, developed to approximately 1,500 words. You know, they say that the night is darkest just before the dawn. Well, let me tell you, That night with Lily felt like it would never end. But as the sun rose over the New York skyline, painting the sterile hospital walls with a warm glow, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I was going to solve this medical mystery if it was the last thing I did. The next few days were a whirlwind. I practically lived at the hospital, catching naps in the on-call room when I could, and surviving on a diet of terrible coffee and even worse vending machine sandwiches. My other patients were passed off to colleagues, a move that raised more than a few eyebrows. Ice Queen, neglecting her duties for a single patient? Unheard of. But I didn't care about the whispers and sideways glances. All I cared about was Lily. Police reports, social workers, more tests on Lily than I could count. We threw everything we had at this case. And through it all, I found myself drawn to her room, telling myself it was just to check her charts, but knowing it was something more. Lily was a fighter. I'll give her that. She faced every test, every question with a bravery that put most adults to shame. But I could see the toll it was taking on her. The light in her eyes dimmed a little more each day. "Dr. Sarah?" she asked one afternoon as I was checking her vitals. "Am I going to die?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd heard it countless times from patients over the years, but never had it affected me like this. "No, kiddo," I said, forcing a smile. "You're not going to die. Not on my watch." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "Good, because I still need to find my mom. She must be so worried about me." I felt a lump form in my throat. We'd made no progress in locating Lily's family, and a part of me was beginning to suspect we never would. But I couldn't bring myself to crush her hope. "We're still looking, Lily. I promise we won't give up." As I left her room that day, I ran into Tom, the chief of pediatrics. He took one look at my face and sighed. "Sarah, when was the last time you slept? In a bed, not hunched over a desk." I waved him off. "Sleep is for the weak, Tom. I'm fine." He shook his head. "You're not fine. You're obsessed. I get it. This case is tough, but you can't help Lily if you run yourself into the ground." I felt a flash of anger. "What do you want me to do, Tom? Give up? Go home and leave her alone in that room, wondering why no one cares enough to find out what's wrong with her?" Tom held up his hands in surrender. "That's not what I'm saying, and you know it. I'm just worried about you. This isn't like you, Sarah." I snorted. "Maybe it should be. Maybe I've been doing it wrong all these years, keeping everyone at arm's length. Maybe caring isn't such a bad thing after all." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, and I saw Tom's eyes widen in surprise. Hell, I surprised myself. But before he could respond, a nurse came running up to us. "Dr. Mitchell? It's Lily. She's having another episode." I was off like a shot, Tom hot on my heels. We burst into Lily's room to find her in the midst of another seizure, her small body convulsing violently. Time seemed to slow down as we worked to stabilize her. I moved on autopilot, years of training kicking in. But inside, I was screaming. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not to Lily. When it was over and Lily was resting peacefully once more, I slumped against the wall, exhaustion washing over me. "Sarah," Tom said gently, "go home, get some rest. I'll keep an eye on Lily." I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. I was no good to Lily like this. With a heavy heart, I trudged out of the hospital and caught a cab home. My apartment felt alien to me as I walked in. Had it really only been a few days since I'd been here? It felt like a lifetime. I collapsed onto my bed, not even bothering to change out of my scrubs. But sleep eluded me. My mind raced, going over Lily's symptoms again and again. There was something I was missing, some piece of the puzzle that would make everything fall into place. And then, just as I was drifting off, it hit me. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. "Oh my God," I whispered to the empty room. How did I miss it? I was back at the hospital in record time, probably breaking a few speed limits along the way. I burst into Lily's room, startling Tom, who had dozed off in the chair by her bed. "Sarah? What are you doing here?" "I thought I told you to get some rest." No time, I said, already pulling up Lily's chart on the computer. I think I know what's wrong with her. Tom was instantly alert. What? What is it? I pulled up the results of Lily's latest tests, my fingers flying over the keyboard. Look at this, I said, pointing to the screen. Her protein levels, the pattern of her seizures, the cognitive symptoms, it all fits. Tom leaned in, his eyes widening as he saw what I was seeing. My God, he breathed, you're right. But it can't be, it's so rare. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it fits. Everything fits. We looked at each other, the weight of the diagnosis hanging heavy between us. Juvenile Huntington's disease. Rare, progressive, and fatal. We need to run more tests, Tom said, already reaching for the phone, to be absolutely sure. I nodded, my eyes drifting to Lily's sleeping form. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm that was about to hit her life. The next few hours were a blur of tests and consultations. We brought in the best neurologists in the hospital, pored over every scrap of data we had, and with each passing minute, my initial diagnosis was confirmed. Lily didn't just need a family, she needed a miracle. I stood outside her room that night, staring at her test results, feeling more lost than I had in years. A nurse approached me, concern etched on her face. Dr. Mitchell, are you all right? I laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the quiet hallway. All right, sure, I'm all right. I just diagnosed a 5-year-old orphan with a death sentence. It's just another Tuesday in paradise, right? The nurse placed a hand on my arm, and I flinched. I couldn't remember the last time someone had touched me with kindness. Sarah, she said softly, using my first name for the first time in years, you can't save everyone. Watch me, I growled, shaking off her hand. I stormed into Lily's room, my mind racing. She was asleep, her blonde curls splayed out on the pillow like a halo. And in that moment, looking at her innocent face, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I was going to save Lily. Not just from her disease, but from a system that would chew her up and spit her out. And if that meant bending a few rules, well, I'd already played God. How much harder could it be to play parent? But first, I had to tell her. I had to look into those big blue eyes and explain that her life was never going to be the same. That the future she dreamed of, growing up, having a family of her own, was slipping away before it had even begun. I must have stood there for hours, watching her sleep, trying to find the right words. As the first light of dawn crept into the room, Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Dr. Sarah? She mumbled sleepily. You're here early. I forced a smile, sitting down on the edge of her bed. Hey, kiddo, how are you feeling? She shrugged, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Okay, I guess. Did you find my mom? I felt my heart break a little more. Not yet, sweetie, but we're still looking. Listen, Lily, there's something I need to talk to you about. Something important. She sat up straighter, her face suddenly serious. Is it about why I keep getting sick? I nodded, taking a deep breath. Yes, it is. We figured out what's causing your seizures and why you've been feeling so tired. What is it? She asked, her voice small and scared. I took her hand in mine, marveling at how tiny and fragile it felt. It's called Huntington's disease, Lily. It's a very rare condition that affects the way your brain works. Can you fix it? She asked, hope shining in her eyes. And there it was, the question I'd been dreading. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I had to be strong for her. We can't fix it, honey, I said gently. Not yet, but we can help you feel better and make sure you have the best life possible. I watched as the reality of my words sank in. Lily's face crumpled and she burst into tears. Without thinking, I gathered her into my arms, holding her close as she sobbed. It's not fair, she cried, her voice muffled against my chest. I want my mom. I want to go home. I know, sweetheart, I murmured, rocking her gently. I know it's not fair, but I promise you, you're not alone. I'm here. I'll always be here. As I held Lily, comforting her in a way I'd never comforted a patient before, I felt something shift inside me. The last of my emotional walls came crumbling down, swept away by a tidal wave of love and protectiveness for this little girl. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. I wasn't just Lily's doctor anymore. I was her advocate, her protector, and maybe, just maybe, something more. Little did I know, the hardest part of our journey was still to come. But in that moment, holding Lily as she cried, I made a silent vow. I would move heaven and earth for this child, and woe betide anyone who tried to stand in my way. Now I know what you're thinking. A cynical, sarcastic doctor suddenly decides to adopt a sick orphan? Sounds like the plot of a bad Lifetime movie, right? Trust me, I was thinking the same thing. But here's the thing about life. It doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care about your carefully constructed walls or your jaded outlook. Life has a way of sneaking up on you, tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, remember all that emotional baggage you've been lugging around? Time to unpack, sweetheart." The day I decided to adopt Lily was the day I realized that sometimes the best medicine isn't found in a pill bottle or an IV bag. Sometimes it's found in a smile, a hug, or the simple act of being there for someone who needs you. The adoption process was a nightmare of red tape and bureaucracy. Turns out, being a brilliant doctor doesn't automatically qualify you as a good parent. Who knew? But I fought. I fought harder than I'd ever fought for any patient. There were countless meetings with social workers, home visits, background checks, you name it. I went through it. And let me tell you, explaining to a judge why a workaholic, emotionally stunted doctor with a caffeine addiction and a penchant for sarcasm would make a good mother was interesting, to say the least. But through it all, Lily was my rock. Her unwavering faith in me, her ability to smile even on her worst days, it gave me strength I didn't know I had. I remember one particularly rough day after a grueling court hearing where my fitness as a potential parent had been questioned again. I trudged into Lily's hospital room feeling defeated. "Hey, Dr. Sarah," Lily chirped, her face lighting up as I walked in. "How did it go?" I forced a smile. "Oh, just another day of trying to convince a bunch of strangers that I'm not completely hopeless as a human being." Lily giggled. "That's silly. You're the best human being I know." And just like that, the weight on my shoulders lifted. Because in that moment, I realized that the only opinion that really mattered was Lily's. Lily fought too. Against her disease, against a system that saw her as a lost cause, against my own fumbling attempts at parenting. We fought together. I won't lie to you. It was hard. There were days when I wanted to give up, to go back to my comfortable life of emotional detachment and sarcastic quips. The first time Lily had a major seizure after I brought her home, I thought my heart would stop. I felt so helpless, watching her small body convulse, knowing there was nothing I could do but wait it out and make sure she didn't hurt herself. But then she'd look at me with those big blue eyes, and I'd remember why I started this crazy journey in the first place. We had our ups and downs. The first time Lily called me Mom, I nearly choked on my coffee. It was a lazy Sunday morning, and I was attempting to make pancakes, emphasis on attempting. Turns out, surgical precision doesn't translate to culinary skills. "Mom," Lily said casually, "I think those pancakes are burning." I stood there, spatula in hand, staring at her in shock. "What did you say?" Lily looked confused. "I said the pancakes are burning. Look." Sure enough, smoke was rising from the pan, but I couldn't have cared less about the pancakes in that moment. "No, before that. You called me Mom." Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw fear flash across her face. Is that okay? I mean, I know you're not really my mom, but..." I cut her off, pulling her into a hug. "It's more than okay, kiddo. It's perfect." From that day on, Mom became my favorite word in the English language. And somewhere along the way, something amazing happened. As I was trying to save Lily, she was saving me. She taught me how to laugh again, how to see the wonder in small things, how to love without fear. Yes, Lily still has Huntington's. We still face an uncertain future. But you know what? We face it together. And that makes all the difference. We've developed our own little rituals. Every night before bed, we share 3 things we're grateful for. Some days, when Lily's having a rough time, her list is short. I'm grateful the pain meds are working, or I'm grateful I didn't have a seizure today. Other days, her list is delightfully random. I'm grateful for butterflies and ice cream and the color purple. My list always starts the same way. I'm grateful for you, Lily. So here I am, 5 years later. Still a doctor. Still sarcastic as hell, but now also a mom. A mom to the bravest, kindest, most amazing little girl you could ever meet. You want to know the biggest irony in all of this? I spent years playing God, thinking I held the power of life and death in my hands. But it took a dying child to teach me the most important lesson of all. The true healing power doesn't come from medicine. It comes from love. To all of you out there who think you've got it all figured out, who think you're too broken, or too cynical, or too set in your ways to change, I have one thing to say. Watch out. Life has a funny way of proving you wrong, and trust me, it's the best thing that could ever happen to you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tea party to attend. Apparently, Mr. Snuggles the bear is feeling under the weather, and Dr. Mom is needed for an emergency consultation. And you know what? There's nowhere else I'd rather be.
Loved this story? Give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing inspiring tales every day. Stay tuned for the next captivating story coming your way soon. We're so grateful to have you with us. Don't forget to click the links on your screen right now to explore a hand-picked collection of amazing stories and endless entertainment. See you there?